What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for the Masters. It's finally that time of year, going to break down everything you need to know about Augusta National Golf Club, a course that pretty much everyone is familiar with, so be able to go pretty quickly through some of the specifics, but most importantly for this week, I want to break down the kinds of key metrics and calm courses I'm looking for at Augusta National to try and identify my top bets and plays of the week, with some nasty weather expected, with a few changes to the course, like number 13 being lengthened. There's a few things that we might want to consider a little bit more for this year's version of the Masters than perhaps for past iterations. So a lot to touch on. Let's go ahead and get it started here with the course preview. So like I said, we can probably be a little bit quicker with this section because most people very familiar with Augusta National, but in case you're a newbie here, let's make sure we're all on the same page. It's a historic track. It's designed by Dr. Alistair McKenzie, also had a little bit of help from Bobby Jones over there in 1933, so like I said, nearly 90 years old at this point. But on top of that, you're dealing with a course that is one of the most iconic around the world. It's got some of the slopiest greens. They tend to run extremely fast. And as a result, it requires an insane level of creativity to have success around Augusta, because to access pin locations, it's often a lot easier to use the slopes around the pins rather than to go directly at them. The greens, because they're so fast, tend to run off relatively easily, so despite being relatively large greens, they play a lot smaller, and to get close to a lot of pin locations, you do have to use the slopes to take advantage. So it's a different beast. You see a lot of experience playing in here. Guys that have played around Augusta 3-4 times tend to have a lot of success compared to some of the newcomers. Some of the players that have had success at Augusta early on in their careers, a lot of times sustain that throughout their career and eventually end up becoming champions. So it's a unique track. It requires a unique style of golf, and frankly, not everybody in the world is capable of producing that sort of style. So definitely guys that are horses for courses that you'll see have that sustained success. None other than a Tiger Woods, of course, would be the perfect example of that. In terms of its length, its setup, it's a 7,500 yard par 72. So I would say on the slightly longer end of the spectrum, but it's not really a bomber's course by any means. The reason why a lot of bombers tend to have success around Augusta is more so about how wide open it is off the tee. Now, over the years, they've tried to make it more and more difficult off the tee, whether it's lengthening holes like they've done to hole number 13 this year, adding a tee box a solid 30, 40 yards back, or just creating harder angles off the tee where they're constricting the landing area. Perhaps they're using overhanging tree branches to try and force players to hit a specific shot off the tee. So Augusta, I'd say off the tee, it's still on the easier end of the spectrum despite a lot of those changes because the rough is almost non-existent. It's 1.375 inches long, so it's less than an inch and a half long there, which for these tour players is essentially non-existent. And you have a lot of leeway between the edge of the fairway than the trees. It's typically about a 10-yard margin at the very least, if not closer to 15 and even sometimes 20 yards wide. So it's hard to get out of position, but kind of like the TPC Sawgrass or what you saw at the Valspar Championship, when you get offline, you are going to be penalized. The trees are extremely dense around Augusta National. It's essentially pristine out there, hasn't been touched all that much over the years. So when you get into those wooded areas, you essentially have to chip out sideways. So there is a penalty for missing big around Augusta National, but for players that can keep the ball relatively online, they shouldn't run into all that much trouble from that perspective. The greens, like I said, are about average size, if not slightly larger than your PGA Tour average, at just under 6,500 square foot per green. There's a bunch of sand bunkers in terms of yardage. There's a lot of large bunkers around Augusta National, but only 44 technical bunkers on property. So about 2-3 bunkers per hole out there, which is actually on the lower end of the spectrum. But like I said, large bunkers, so they encompass a large surface area of the golf course. In terms of water hazards, there's water in play on 5 holes, so not a ton of it, but most of it comes in play on the back 9 towards the last 5-6 holes, where especially some of the par 3s down the stretch, like we have there at 12, can get especially dicey. And then the greens, just to go over the agronomy here, we have bent grass greens, bent grass approaches, ryegrass overseed on the approaches and fairways, and then the rough is also that ryegrass overseed. So It's rye bent like you see for a lot of the courses this time of year. And of course, the greens around Augusta National tend to be some of the most pristine that you see all season. Now looking at some of the stats, right? And like I said, we're going to have a lot to talk about with the weather, so take these with a grain of salt. Last year, it played 1.95 shots over par, which I would say is a difficult Masters, played a little bit more difficult than you see for some years. That was despite there being a 71.5% driving accuracy. So a lot of people were hitting fairways. Like I said, off the tee, it's pretty much wide open, large landing areas. The greens regulation rate was only 60.6% though. And like I said, about average size greens, they're firm, but they're not US Open PGA Championship firm like you see it for a few tournaments out there. But all those runoff areas, the slopes that are on all of these greens are why the green regulation rate was only 60.6%. You have to be perfect. You have to hit the right section of the green to end up getting a green regulation. And that's where you see a lot of the separation with the field, right? The players that can play strategically, hit their spots on the greens are the ones that are going to excel the most here. So that led to a 1.95 over par scoring average. And now it's time to touch on the weather, which for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there's over a 40% chance of rain in the area. And then specifically on Thursday and Friday, there's, especially on Thursday too, there's a really high chance of having thunderstorms. So a lot of these averages, like the scoring average that was close to two over par, might be a lot worse this year because along with the rains, they're going to be high winds, especially there for Friday and Saturday. So a lot of this is going to come down to weather. If it ends up raining and then there's not a bunch of wind, it could actually play easier than what you've seen in the past. So we're going to have to play this by word of mouth. We're going to have to wait until we get a little bit closer to lock and get a true weather forecast to start to make some of these assertions. But the scoring averages, the percentages from last year, I don't know if they're going to be all that helpful when it comes to betting props this year or going out there and doing your own analysis in terms of course fit because of how dynamic the weather situation could be. And just to give you an idea, right, if it's going to be super windy, a slog out there, that's the kind of conditions that Denny Willett won in, where it was all about just surviving, being able to make par out there around Augusta National. I think guys like Ricky Fowler had a really good year that year. Jordan Spieth, for example, was up there in contention for a long time there. You're looking for guys that can save par, right? Whereas if we end up getting the wet conditions and then no rain, it's the complete opposite. We want guys that are aggressive, that can go out there and make birdies in bunches. So it's anytime you have a weather situation, it stinks in terms of delays, right? Might even have a Monday finish for this year's Masters, and especially annoying when it comes to the modeling perspective because, there's two extremes that are, both possible of happening, and they just give us a completely different outlook on the tournament depending on which one ends up coming true. All right, and now for a little hole-by-hole breakdown. So everyone's familiar with the holes around here, but what's important for DFS? So hole number 1, about 450 yards. You can miss in these left trees. I mean, Matthew Wolff over the years has missed in these right trees even and gotten yourself into trouble. But most players going to prioritize the accuracy here and then have something in that mid-iron range. So check that off for the first mid-iron that you have around Augusta National. There's going to be a whole lot of those mid and long irons. So that's why I say to put that in the back of your mind there. Hole number 2 is a par 5, so of course most players are going to go for 2, especially given that it's a little bit downhill for your tee shot and for your second shot. So it plays a little bit shorter than the 580 yards that you see over there. So yet again, another long iron that you have to hit. Hole 3, one of the shorter par 4s on property. In fact, a lot of players will hit a driving iron or perhaps a 3-wood off the tee to try and make sure you can squeeze it into the fairway and leave yourself at the very most a degreed wedge. So holes 2, hole 3 are much needed birdie looks because the rest of the course is a little bit of a punch in the face. That starts with hole number 4. That is a 250-yard par 3, oftentimes placed directly into the wind. So an extremely difficult hole. Hole 5 is 504 yards. It's a par 4, so another hole where you're going to have a long iron in hand, right? To this count, that's at least 3 through the first 5 holes. Hole number 6 is 187 yards. I'd classify this as a mid-iron, but one of the more slopey greens on property, so even when you hit this surface, it's oftentimes a whole task to go out there and even get down in 2 for a par. Hole 7 is 449, so the same distance as hole number 1. Similar tee shot too, right? It's a little bit of a shootout there. One of the narrower landing areas that you have around Augusta National, but I wouldn't classify it as a stripe by any means like you'll see at US Opens. But the trees on the left and the right, you've got to stay clear of them. So you will see players here that take a 3-wood off the tee, right? Try and limit their dispersion pattern and set up another mid-iron into the green. Hole 8 is 576, so of course another scoring par 5. This one actually plays slightly uphill, especially with your second shot, so it's not reachable for the entire field. A lot of it will be wind dependent, but a ton of room to miss over here to the right. So you can see the next tee box over there. A lot of players are going to lay up right over here to the front right side of the green and leave themselves a pretty good angle into almost every single pin location here on the green. So this is a positional par 5 for a lot of the field, but yeah, some of the bombers might get it up there for an eagle try. Hole 9 is 465 dogleg from right to left. You have a ton of room off the tee here to run things through. Because that rough is pretty much non-existent, the bombers have a distinct advantage here by being able to take the trees out of play. But it's 465. Most players might even have a wedge in hand coming into this green. It's actually one of the easier holes, kind of like holes number 2 and 3 out there. Hole 10, if they were starting on the back 9, which is just something they don't do at the Masters, this would be an absolute bear. I would not want to start on hole 10. It's 500 yards. If they end up having to do so due to weather concerns, I mean, I would not be a happy camper having to start on this hole. So despite it playing downhill, it plays a little bit shorter than the 500-yard mark there. The green's extremely difficult. When they use the front right or the back right pin, if you miss over here to the right side, it's like double bogey galore. It's hard to even get it to stay on the green from the right side over there. Everything slopes from back to front left. So again, if you miss to the right, you're short-sided oftentimes to those right pins and playing down a heavily sloped little hill there, and oftentimes you'll miss to the front side of the green or even just over the green. So difficult hole for sure. I would not want to start there. Hole 11 is 536. It's a par 4. Has water in play for your second shot. This is one of the most difficult holes around Augusta, also one of the more iconic. Another long iron, right? Check it in that box there. Hole 12, the most difficult par 3 under crunch time that you'll see. So many blowups that'll happen here. It's that back right pin that they use on Sunday is just ridiculously difficult. Most players would be smart just to aim out to the left, take the water out of play, and move on with a par or even a bogey at that point. But if you go for it over here in the right, more often than not, you're going to end up in the water or over here to the back right of the green, which is an extremely difficult up and down. Hole 13 is one of the huge changes this year that we're gonna have to consider. You can see the overhead view hasn't been updated, but they moved the tee box back. So they bought this land, they moved the trees, they planted new stuff back there. The tee box is pretty much right where this little white marker is, which completely changes the hole. Before, when you were teeing off, they tried to push it back as far as possible. You can see the trees starting to get kind of cut out there. The little shadows down there where the tee box is. People were able to hit it to like the edge of this forest out here. So you'd see guys, where the little cursor is up here, it's actually set the target there, way up there in the corner, right? And if you're up there, you have about 200 yards in, which for the shot with the water to the right, with one of the more difficult greens on the course, people would go for that, right? Even if they were out of position, right? You'd see guys going for the green. Well, now your target area is like the whole way back here. At best. And this is if you're one of the longer players off the tee, right? You can kind of get it to go with the slope of the land out there. That leaves you at 260 yards, which, depending on wind direction, really makes you think about going for this green, right? If there wasn't a creek here, right, most people would just try to get it up their green side. But if you try and do that now and you miss in the wrong spot, well, you could be looking at a bogey on one of, the birdie holes here around Augusta National. So, I think it's going to play significantly harder this year. I don't think you're going to see as many eagles, probably only like 1 or 2 eagles the entire week. I still think you're going to see a lot of birdies, though. So I think they're just trying to protect against a lot of threes there and make players earn their birdie for sure. Hole number 14 is 442. It's one of the easier tee shots. You can see the landing area is massive, so don't expect that much trouble in hole 14. Hole 15 is 558, another birdie opportunity. You do have water in play for your second shot, so If you're going to go for 2, right, you've definitely got to err on the long side, if anything. Another long iron box to check off there. Hole 16 is 178. You've got the water in play here too. So like I mentioned before, almost all the water comes in play down the stretch, which of course is perfect from the entertainment perspective. This is where Tiger Woods nearly made the hole-in-one en route to his win. Hole 17 is 445. This tee shot is still relatively wide open, but there's a lot more trouble in play here, right? Unlike hole 14, which is there's literally nothing out there to get you in trouble. You can miss over here to the left or in these trees to the right, but execute a solid 3-wood off the tee, and you've got yourself probably a 9-iron in. And then finally, hole 18, your finishing hole, dogleg from left to right. This tee shot sucks, right? So like unlike the past few holes, you do have fairway bunkers in play on 18, which aren't that prominent around Augusta, right? Most of them are greenside bunkers. But look how the landing area is not only relatively narrow, right? It slants from left to right, which means if you miss to the left, you're going to be missing like way back here, and you're going to have like a 220-yard shot out of the trees to the green, which most of the time you're just going to have to chip out, right? And if you're going for the green, good luck, right? Trying to keep it under the trees and get it 220 yards. You miss to the right, you're absolutely screwed. You have no choice but to lay up at that point. There's no way you're going to banana slice it around the corner. I mean, Bubba Watson might be able to like hit a duck hook around the corner, right? But he's probably not going to get it on the green. You miss to the right, you're screwed too. So hole 18, you could see a lot of drama here, right? This is where Scotty ended up like 4-putting on the last green, but he had such a large margin that it didn't really matter. It's the perfect finishing hole for pretty much the perfect golf course. All right, now that we've seen the golf course, let's go ahead and go through our key metrics for success this week that I'm using to identify my top plays. At number 1, we've got shots gained approach. This is a second shot golf course if I have ever seen one. It's all about not only hitting greens around Augusta, but hitting the right section of the green. When you have those 2-tiered putts, when you're trying to putt to a different section of the green, you're going to have a hard time getting home in 2, and you're going to see 3-putt after 3-putt. But for players that can hit the right sections of the green, oftentimes slopes are going to help you get it really close to the pin. And in fact, right, you're going to be rewarded even more so than usual for being an elite level iron player. So over the years, it's not a surprise that some of the best iron players of all time have just dominated around Augusta National. So that's not a surprise. You know, Tiger Woods, right, one of, if not the best iron player of all time, has dominated here at this course. And honestly, this week, we'll talk about him when we get to some of the DFS videos later in the week. I think he's going to have a really good showing this time around. He showed me a lot there at the Genesis, and just he's the perfect style of golfer here. And on top of the approach play, let's get to key stat number 2 here. Why is Tiger Woods a perfect fit? Oh, because he's extremely creative. And if we had a shots gained creativity stat, I would go ahead and plug it into my model, but obviously that's just not a thing. What we have found over the years is that really good around the green players are elite at it because of their creativity. So when you look at the shots gained around the green board, guys like Jordan Spieth, Justin Thomas filtered to the top, guys like Tiger Woods, exceptional around the green players, are also some of the most creative players in the world, right? And sure, there's going to be exceptions to the rule, but we've got to use something to go out there and quantify this, right? Like I said, there is no shots gained creativity stat. So technically, the stat here is going to be shots gained around the green, but really what we're looking for around Augusta is that creativity factor, and it's because of all the slopes. When you miss greens, which is inevitable, right? Only about 60% of greens were hit last year at the Masters, could be even lower this year depending on how the weather ends up shaking out, is getting up and down when you have greens running at like 12.5 on the stint meter and massive slopes. Right? To get the ball close to some of these pins, you have to aim 90 degrees away from the hole and hope that a slope will take it there close. So it's a lot of it comes down to experience, which is our third key stat. So a little segue there, perfect segue. The third thing that you want, the reason why Tiger and a lot of other guys that have sustained success around Augusta are able to do so is because of their experience, their course history. So unlike a lot of other courses where course history is kind of just something I'm using as an added benefit, right? Like my number 5 or number 6 key stat on any given week, it's my number 3 key stat this week because of how sticky it has been historically. Guys that have had success at Augusta tend to have sustained success around here. So I think if you're going to look at anything, right, number 1 key stat, approach play. Number 2, right, looking at around the green. But then we're starting to look at some of these, course history stats. On top of that, looking at shots gained in major championships. That's my number 4 key stat. When we're looking at Augusta, it's a little bit of a different beast. we're not really looking for the same sort of stats or same sort of stat profile we're looking at other courses. Like putting, for example. Putting is important. This is a really difficult putting track, but if anything, 3-putt avoidance is kind of what you're looking for here, because when you hit the ball to the right tier, you're going to have that 5 to 10 foot range, which I think if you're going to look at any sort of, advanced analytics when it comes to putting, shots gained putting on bent grass, worth a few looks, right? We've got some bent grass greens here. Shots gained on extremely fast greens, probably a filter that you could look through too. But what I think is the most important is that 5 to 10 foot range, right? Looking at that filter, if you're on whatever shots gained database that you have access to, and look at some of the best 5 to 10 foot putters, because that's where all your birdie looks are going to come from. So for putting this week, it's, in my model, but it's not nearly as important as it would be for most tour tracks. Off the tee play, also not all that important, because if anything, we're looking for distance guys, right? It's wide open enough off the tee where you're not really going to get into all that much trouble, particularly when it comes to like penalty shots. If anything, a lot of the penalty shots come into play for your approaches, as you saw with those par 5s, with a few of the par 3s with water in play. So off the tee, also way de-emphasized in my modeling this week. Not really something I'm considering all that much. It's much more about that approach play, that course history, and then that creativity factor, which, again, I wish there was that shots gained creativity stat out there we could use, but we'll make do with what we can there with the shots gained around the green. A few other things to consider. Par 5 scoring, important there, always important at this course. Birdie or better percentage, always important when you're looking at the DFS side. So, and also I would argue important when it comes to coming out and winning an outright, right? Going out there and getting that top end upside. You need guys that are willing to go low, go out there and make a bunch of birdies. And sure, this golf course probably going to play over par this year, but to win at the Masters, you've still got to make 15 to 20 birdies, probably even more to end up winning this major championship. You could consider shots gained at Augusta National, like I said, obviously course history, like we mentioned before, and also some of the comps around Augusta National, which we're going to talk about right now. All right, guys, in terms of comps this week, the main real factor I think we can glean a lot from are these difficult green complexes. The shots gained ball striking at Augusta isn't really all that unique, right? It's 7,500 yards. It's a lot of mid to long irons. There's a bunch of PGA Tour tracks, right? We could use as a comp for that perspective. What's harder to find players for is that creativity factor, right? Like I said, if we had that shots gained creativity, I think we'd be able to really pick a lot of good plays this week, right? We'd be able to find the horses for courses. Well, a way to figure that out, right, is to look at a few examples around the PGA Tour where they have a similar kind of setup. Firm and fast greens, a lot of slope, and an architect that was purposely trying to make it difficult. Well, there's 3 courses that really come to mind for me for that. And at number 1, we've got Riviera, right? Over there, another golden age design, which is important to consider because Augusta National, another golden age design by Dr. Alistair McKenzie, also Bobby Jones over there. The things to look at here are the green complexes. Extremely sloped, really fast greens that are 3-putted all the time, extremely difficult around the green, and it's about hitting the right section of the green over there at Riviera. You've heard a lot of people compare them. Agronomically, they're not similar, right? You're talking about different green types, different grass types, different part of the country, right? One's humid, one's very dry over there, different time zones. I mean, there's a lot of differences, right, between Riviera and then what you get at Augusta National. But that ideology around the green, where you have to play away from the hole sometimes, is one of the best comps that we get, right? There's nothing like Augusta National, but Riviera is along the same kind of vein. And it was a golf course built at that same time period, so it also makes sense from that perspective. So Riviera, looking at that for the Genesis Invitational, that's a comp that I'm using. Next up, we've got Muirfield Village. That is, of course, a golf course that we go to every single year. In fact, a few years ago, we went there multiple times in a row in back-to-back weeks. It's another track with extremely difficult greens. It's up there in Ohio, so a little bit closer to Augusta when it comes to the agronomy. You also have bent grass greens there at Muirfield Village. The rough is a lot more penal there, though. So it's a little bit more of a ball striking test around Muirfield Village as opposed to what you get at Augusta National. Of course, approach play is going to be emphasized regardless of the track. So that's why it's there at number 2, right? I don't think it's a perfect comp, especially because some of the rough is just a little bit too gnarly for my liking. But the green complex is very similar, very speedy greens over there at Muirfield Village. Another way to look at that. And lastly, we've got Kapalua. So that's the home of the Tournament of Champions. Anytime we're at Kapalua, we always talk about Augusta because the greens there, they're a lot slower because of some of the coastal winds you get over there in Hawaii, but they're extremely sloped. And a lot of the around the green shots require the same sort of creativity. So there's a reason why it's at number 3. It's also an extremely easy course, right? It's nowhere near a major championship test, but at least from the greens, I think that there's a lot that you can learn there. And there's been a lot of crossover on some of the leaderboards over the years as well. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead, comment down below what you've got the winning score at. It's going to be extremely volatile given the weather situation. I'm going to assume that's going to be windy there on Friday and Saturday as they're calling for right now. And I'll take 12 under par, right? I'm assuming that somebody's going to be able to take this place apart a little bit there, kind of similar to the conditions you saw there in 2022. But go ahead and let me know your thoughts. I really wouldn't be surprised if we saw something like -3, -4 win if the winds really get nasty, or something like -16 to -18 winning if the winds completely die down, because a soft Augusta National, as we've seen in the past, is also extremely gettable, at least if you're on your top end game. So it's going to be an interesting one, definitely volatile from that perspective. So definitely want to hear your thoughts down below. Go ahead and comment that. Until next time, best of luck with any outrights you decide to fire this week, any DFS lineups that you're going to end up entering. And I appreciate all the support here on the channel. Go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already. Go ahead, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We'll be posting core plays later today, value plays. Our usual DFS live stream will be Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you've got any questions, if you want to see the last second weather report, some of the chalk for GPPs, my outright betting card, and of course, like I said, any of your questions will be going over down in the chat. Make sure to stop on by for that. But until then, best of luck with your research this week, going out there crushing it here for the Masters, and let's have ourselves a week, fellas.